The summer of 1986 had been unusually warm in the Adirondack Mountains, where Camp Echo Pines sat nestled beside the still waters of Lake Marlow. The camp, open since the 1950s, had always been considered safe, a rustic getaway where children from upstate New York came to roast marshmallows, swim and chase fireflies after dark. That illusion shattered on the night of July 17th. 12-year-old Katie Holbrook never returned to her cabin after the evening bonfire. Her bunkmates assumed she'd gone to the bathroom. Her counselor believed she had dozed off somewhere. By morning, the truth was undeniable. Katie was gone. The camp staff launched an immediate search. Trails were combed. The lake was dredged. Helicopters buzzed overhead while search dogs followed the scent of her sleeping bag. Camp was shut down within 48 hours. Parents were called to collect their children. State police set up a base of operations in the camp's main lodge. The Holbrook family arrived, hollow-eyed and trembling to walk the grounds themselves. Katie's mother, Marlene, refused to leave for 3 days, sitting outside cabin 4 with her daughter's sweater folded in her lap. There was no sign of struggle. No screams had been heard. No one remembered seeing Katie near the woods, and her flashlight was found on her bunk, untouched. The last person to confirm seeing her was another camper, Ellie Travers, who claimed Katie had been giggling about sneaking into the mess hall to steal an extra dessert. But the mess hall was locked that night, and no food was missing. Investigators expanded the search radius. By day 10, nearly 300 volunteers, including local firefighters and forest rangers, were combing through the thick underbrush. Posters with Katie's smiling face were plastered on every telephone pole from Albany to Buffalo. Tips came in from all over. Claims that she'd been seen in diners, buses, and one bizarre report that she'd been spotted with a traveling circus. Each lead ended in disappointment. The case, once burning hot, began to cool. Camp Echo Pines never reopened. It stood abandoned for years, overgrown and silent, a place parents pointed to as a cautionary tale. By the early 2000s, Katie Holbrook's disappearance had become just another cold case, remembered mostly by her grieving family and the small town of Harrowsville, which had never fully recovered from the trauma. But then, in the fall of 2002, something changed. A group of college students hiking near the old camp ruins came across a hollowed tree not far from the original trail entrance. Inside it, tucked deep in the bark, was a folded piece of paper sealed in a weathered plastic bag. The writing was faint, barely legible, but what it said would stun the town and reopen the mystery that had haunted them for 16 years. The note, barely larger than a dollar bill and folded tightly into quarters, was written in uneven handwriting with blue ink that had faded over time. The plastic bag had preserved most of the page, but parts were smudged by moisture or age. At the top, scrawled in all caps, were the words, "If you find this, please tell my mom I'm alive." The name signed below made the students freeze in place. It read, Katie Holbrook. For a moment, none of them spoke. They passed the note between trembling hands before one finally took out a cell phone and called the sheriff's department. Within hours, the forest trail near the old camp was filled with flashing lights and yellow tape. The note was collected, photographed, and secured by investigators. It was real, confirmed by forensics to be from the 1990s, possibly written in the mid to late part of that decade. The ink matched common brands from the time, and more importantly, fingerprints on the plastic bag were partial. But one matched an old record taken from Katie's personal belongings back in '86. The Holbrook family, now living in a smaller town about 2 hours south, was contacted immediately. Marlene Holbrook, now in her late 60s, sat in stunned silence as investigators showed her the recovered note. She held it as if it were made of glass, tears streaking down her face, reading the words over and over again. "She's alive?" she asked, her voice hoarse with disbelief. But no one could confirm that, not yet. The site around the tree was excavated. Investigators combed the area for more evidence, and while no additional notes were found, they did uncover something else. A rusted tin lunchbox, buried a few feet away. Inside were wrappers from old snack bars, a tiny comb, and a toy ring that Katie's mother immediately recognized. It had been in her daughter's backpack the summer she vanished. None of the items looked recently disturbed. The lunchbox had likely been buried for over a decade. Detectives now faced the difficult task of reassembling a case frozen in time. Theories that had long been dismissed were revisited. Did Katie run away? Was she being held somewhere? How had she survived long enough to write that note? And where had she gone afterward? Locals whispered about the strange old mill 2 miles north of the camp, abandoned even longer than Echo Pines. Others mentioned a recluse who had lived in a trailer deep in the woods during the late 80s and early 90s, a man known only by his nickname, Red. He had died in 1999, but rumors about him had always circled the town. People said he spoke to animals, hated the police, and never let anyone near his land. The reopening of the case stirred painful memories. Katie's former bunkmates, now adults with families of their own, gave interviews and revisited the trauma of that night. Some remembered small things: strange lights near the forest, a dog barking non-stop, or the scent of cigarettes where there shouldn't have been any. 16 years had passed. But now the town of Harrowsville found itself asking the same questions all over again. Only now they had one chilling new piece of the puzzle. The story spread quickly, first through local news, then across state lines. A handwritten note from a girl missing since 1986 was the kind of mystery that grabbed attention. Reporters descended on Harrowsville, their cameras pointed at the overgrown entrance to Camp Echo Pines, now choked with vines and rusted signs. But this was no longer just a tragic memory. This was a potential breakthrough. Investigators focused on the note's wording. "Please tell my mum I'm alive." It was simple, desperate, and oddly hopeful. It didn't mention danger, or fear, or where she had been. Some experts suggested the tone implied she had been isolated, but not necessarily under threat. But that theory only raised more questions. Why hadn't she returned home? Why had she hidden the message in a tree instead of mailing it or giving it to someone? Had someone been watching her? The old camp was re-examined from end to end. Drones were flown over the forest. Cadaver dogs were brought in again, although many felt the trail had long gone cold. Investigators mapped the route between the camp and the hollow tree. It wasn't far from one of the lesser-used fire roads, something a local or someone living off-grid might have known well. They began digging into old property maps and rental records, looking for anyone who had lived nearby between 1986 and 2002. Katie's case file, hundreds of pages long, was reopened. The old sheriff, now retired, gave an interview, recalling the week she vanished. He admitted something that had never made it into the public record. The morning after Katie disappeared, one of the camp staff had reported seeing a strange man at the edge of the lake just before sunrise. The man wasn't a parent or counselor. He wore camouflage and had been carrying something under a tarp. By the time anyone looked for him, he was gone. The tip hadn't led anywhere at the time. But now, that vague description became important. Camp staff were re-interviewed, and one former lifeguard recalled a name: George Red Calhoun. The man known as Red. He'd been seen once near the supply shed, asking for directions, then vanished again. He wasn't a suspect back then, just another strange character in the woods. But digging deeper revealed something more disturbing. Red Calhoun had been arrested in 1990 for trespassing on school property, carrying a hunting knife. He was never charged. 2 years later, he was cited for building an illegal structure on state land, only a few miles from Camp Echo Pines. And then, in 1999, he died in a fire that destroyed the trailer he lived in. No one ever claimed his body. Detectives now considered the unthinkable. Had Katie been taken in by Red? Had she escaped, or had she been alone after his death? Had she died out there too, but her note survived longer than she did? The forest around Echo Pines now held a deeper weight. It wasn't just a place of forgotten laughter and broken cabins. It was a silent witness to something much darker. And for the first time in 16 years, the town believed that answers might still be hidden in the trees. In the weeks that followed the discovery of the note, law enforcement launched a full reinvestigation with the help of state authorities. They brought in a behavioral profiler, hoping to reconstruct the mindset of both Katie and the man suspected to have taken her. George Red Calhoun, though long dead, became the focal point of this new inquiry. If he had kept Katie hidden for any period of time, someone might have seen something. Someone might still be out there, carrying a piece of the truth. Locals were questioned once again, but many had either moved away or passed on. A few, however, remembered the strange old man who lived near the creek in the late 80s and early 90s. He rarely spoke, kept his distance, but was often seen walking the tree lines with a sack over his shoulder. Children had been warned to stay away from him. One woman, who was a teenager at the time, remembered seeing smoke from his chimney on mornings when frost still clung to the grass. "You always knew where Red was by the smell of burning pine and that ugly mutt he kept on a chain," she said. Investigators mapped every structure that had once existed in the surrounding woods, including Red's former trailer site. The clearing was still visible, though overgrown. A metal bed frame remained, scorched and twisted. Beneath the earth, they unearthed rusted cans, a broken lantern, and scraps of clothing. Among them was a button that matched the summer uniform Katie had been wearing in her camp photo. DNA analysis would take weeks, but the implications were immediate. This wasn't just a random place in the woods. This had been someone's shelter, and possibly Katie's prison. The presence of her belongings, or at least something close to them, raised the terrifying possibility that she had been alive there for some time. The town of Harrowsville became a spotlight once again. News vans lined the main road, and journalists camped out near the lake, hoping to catch any new development. But it was Marlene Holbrook who captured the nation's heart. She stood on her front porch, holding the old photo of her daughter, and addressed the media with a voice cracked by decades of sorrow. If she was out there, if she lived, I want to know how long she waited. I want to know if she was alone. Meanwhile, the note was studied by handwriting experts. Though faint, the slant of the letters, the pressure of the strokes, and the inconsistencies in the cursive loops all matched earlier samples of Katie's writing from school journals and birthday cards. The match wasn't perfect. 16 years could change anyone's penmanship, but the probability that it was authentic climbed with each test. And yet, the most haunting part of the note wasn't the words themselves. It was the hidden message written lightly on the back. Barely visible, as if scratched in desperation, were the numbers 7 to 2298. Investigators had no idea what it meant. A date, a code, a clue. For the Holbrooks, and for everyone in Harrowsville, it was one more thread in a mystery that refused to rest. And the woods around Camp Echo Pines, long silent, now seemed to whisper again. The date scratched on the back of the note, 7/22/98, became the new obsession of investigators. It didn't match any public records, anniversaries, or police activity related to the case. Yet it felt intentional. Someone, likely Katie herself, had etched it there for a reason. What happened on July 22nd, 1998? The search through old files began again. Police combed through local reports, missing person logs and hospital admissions. One unusual record surfaced. On that exact date, a ranger in the Catskills filed a strange incident report. A teenage girl, barefoot and disoriented, had been spotted near a remote fishing trail. When the ranger approached her, she ran. He noted that she was wearing clothes that appeared several sizes too big and carried nothing with her, not even shoes. She disappeared into the trees, and a brief search turned up nothing. The sighting was dismissed as a local runaway or a teen from a nearby camp. But now investigators wondered, had that been Katie? A composite sketch from the 1998 report was pulled. When shown to Marlene Holbrook, her breath caught. "It looks like her," she whispered. The jawline, the nose, subtle changes that aligned with how Katie might have looked at 24. Investigators had to entertain the chilling possibility Katie may have escaped and disappeared again. The theory raised more unsettling questions. If she'd escaped Red Calhoun's control, or whatever situation she had been in, why hadn't she come home? Why had she remained silent? Had she been afraid? Or had something else happened between 1998 and 2002 when the note was found? Then came another breakthrough. A retired postal worker came forward, having seen the news about the note. She had worked in a rural sorting facility near Harrowsville in the late 90s and recalled something odd, a sealed letter with no return address, mailed to a P.O. box in town. What made it strange was that the handwriting on the envelope was childlike, and inside, according to a co-worker, was a piece of cloth with a name stitched on it, Katie. It had never been linked to the case because it was considered a prank at the time. The P.O. box it was sent to had belonged to a man named Dwight Felder, a retired teacher who had passed away in 2001. He had no connection to the Holbrooks, the camp, or Red Calhoun, but he did own property, a small, decaying cabin, just 6 miles from where the note was found. The cabin was abandoned. The roof caved in, but the basement remained intact. Police searched the cabin. Inside, they found remnants of makeshift bedding, empty canned food containers, and an old, rusted lantern. Carved into the wall near the stairs were the initials KH and what appeared to be tally marks, 47 of them, etched vertically in sets of 5. No other signs of life were found. But for investigators, it painted a picture both fascinating and heartbreaking. Someone had been there, someone who counted the days, someone who left no footprints, only scratches and whispers. 16 years after she disappeared, Katie Holbrook's story was no longer just a tragedy. It was a riddle that pulsed with new life and darker possibilities. For weeks, forensic teams sifted through the crumbling remains of Dwight Felder's cabin. The tally marks on the wall became a symbol of haunting speculation. 47 marks. Had Katie been counting days, weeks, months? No one could say for certain. The initials KH carved nearby only deepened the mystery, confirming that someone, likely her, had at least been in that basement. But when? And why that place? The cabin had no electricity and minimal insulation. The basement was dark, windowless, and musty with rot. Yet in one corner, investigators found something unexpected. A child's drawing, faded but intact. It was of a girl in front of a tall tree with a hollow trunk. Above her was a yellow sun, and in her hand she held what looked like a folded piece of paper. It wasn't signed, but the style resembled drawings kept by Katie's mother in a scrapbook from her early childhood. The artistic quirks matched, the way Katie drew eyelashes too long, the way she made her sun with 8 rays, not more or less. It was a small thing, but for Marlene Holbrook it was everything. The drawing was dated in the corner 7/22/98, the same date scratched onto the back of the note. That confirmed it. Katie had drawn this. The question now was what happened after. But just as the trail seemed to heat up, it cooled again. Searches around the property turned up no human remains, no clothing, no more notes. DNA testing from the basement was inconclusive, too degraded. Without physical proof of Katie's presence beyond the drawing and initials, law enforcement found themselves at a frustrating impasse. That's when a former camp counselor named Jenna Reeves came forward. She had stayed quiet for years, plagued by guilt and unsure if her memory had betrayed her. But now, hearing about the drawing and the date, she recalled something. On the last night of camp in 1986, Katie had been upset. She had wanted to call her mother, but was told to wait until the next day. Jenna remembered Katie wandering off during the campfire. When she was found 20 minutes later, her shoes were wet. She claimed to have just gone down by the lake, but something about her demeanor had felt off. Jenna also remembered something else. Katie had mentioned a man she called the Watchman. She said he lived in the trees and gave her a candy once when she was alone. The adults had brushed it off, assuming it was a child's imagination or perhaps an older camper trying to scare her. But now that detail took on a more sinister edge. Could the Watchman have been Red Calhoun, or someone else entirely? Jenna wept during her interview. "I should have said something," she told reporters. "I thought it was just a game. I didn't know." 16 years after her disappearance, Katie Holbrook was no longer just a name on a list. Her voice, through drawings, notes, and shadows, was rising again, quietly and insistently, from the deep places the town had buried. The mention of the Watchman was a turning point. Investigators began combing through files for any reference to individuals who frequented the area surrounding Camp Echo Pines in the mid-1980s. Local hunters, rangers, vagrants, even summer workers who'd passed through. The camp had maintained sparse records, but one name surfaced that hadn't been tied to the case before: a groundskeeper named Ellis Drew. Ellis had been hired briefly in 1985 to perform basic maintenance, but records showed that he had returned several times in '86, even though he was never officially rehired. Several counselors remembered him vaguely: tall, quiet, kept mostly to himself, drove a brown station wagon, wore heavy boots even in the summer. One former staff member recalled he once built a makeshift bench near the lake, carved with the word watch. That word alone sent shivers through the team. Ellis Drew had left town in 1987. No forwarding address, no criminal record. He'd simply vanished into the fringes of society. But thanks to renewed interest in the case, police traced him to a small town in New Mexico, where he had been living under a slightly altered name, Eli Drew. When investigators arrived at his trailer, Ellis was cooperative but visibly nervous. He denied any involvement with Katie Holbrook. He claimed not to remember her or even the summer of 1986 in detail, but inconsistencies quickly piled up. He referred to a staff member by name who he claimed never liked him, even though that person only worked at the camp during the exact summer Katie vanished. He also admitted to carving a bench by the lake. "I thought it was peaceful," he said. "I liked to watch the water." A search warrant was issued. Inside his home, police found a locked chest containing childhood toys, old photographs of campgrounds, and, most chillingly, a worn-out diary that appeared to belong to a girl. The front page was missing, but the handwriting was delicate, young, and filled with short entries like, "He watched me again today, and I miss Mom." One page said simply, "I'm still here." It wasn't conclusively Katie's, but it was enough to rattle everyone involved. Back in Harrowsville, the Holbrook family waited. For years they had endured birthdays without candles, holidays without smiles, and Mother's Days that hurt more than healed. Now with each new lead, hope and fear returned in equal measure. What if Katie had been alive for years? What if she had died trying to come home? The town itself began to change. A mural was painted on the wall of the old post office. Katie's face beside the forest trees. Candles flickered beneath it at night. Strangers left notes, flowers, even drawings from their own children. The tree where the original note had been found became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Visitors whispered near it, as if trying to hear what it still knew. The bark was worn from hands tracing its grooves, hoping to feel a connection, a sign, a story that was still unfolding. Because now, after 16 years, it seemed clear. The truth had been out there all along. It had just taken the right voice, the right timing, and a single forgotten note in a hollow tree to bring it back into the light. The discovery of the diary in Ellis Drew's trailer sent shockwaves through both Harrowsville and the national media. Though forensic tests had yet to confirm it belonged to Katie Holbrook, the contents were undeniable in their emotional weight. Each entry, short and often repetitive, painted a picture of deep loneliness. A girl kept somewhere out of sight, watching, waiting, hoping. The diary was dated sporadically, using only days of the week or the changing weather as clues. It rained again today. He stayed inside. Or, full moon tonight. I heard the owl again. What struck investigators most was the absence of any real names. The girl referred to herself simply as me, and the man as he or the watcher. Inside the diary was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile. On it, drawn in faint pencil, was a map. Crude but detailed enough to recognize key landmarks: Lake Bitterpine, a twisted cedar tree, an old bridge long since removed. At the end of the winding path was a drawing of a small house beneath what looked like a mountain ridge. Investigators compared it to satellite maps and found a match: a remote hunting shack that had collapsed years earlier, just 6 miles north of campgrounds, buried deep in overgrowth and forgotten roads. A search team was dispatched immediately. What they found there changed everything. Beneath the rotted remains of the shack's flooring, hidden beneath a loose panel, was a small space no larger than a closet. Inside were the remnants of a mattress, strands of long hair caught in a nail, and a child's bracelet, pink plastic with the name Katie etched in fading letters. Forensics confirmed it. The hair matched Katie's childhood DNA profile. That closet had been hers, her hiding place, her prison. But the most startling discovery came later. Buried beneath a nearby tree, investigators found a small metal tin. Inside it, wrapped in a faded bandana, was a second note. Like the first, it appeared to be in Katie's handwriting. The words were trembling and smudged, but readable. "If someone finds this, I tried, I waited, I prayed, I ran. But he found me again. Please tell my mom I never forgot her. It was dated 1998. Just weeks after the ranger's sighting of a barefoot girl near the fishing trail, this was no longer a case of a girl vanishing. It was the story of a girl who fought to survive, who left clues, who believed, even in fear, that one day someone would find her words. Back in Harrowsville, Marlene Holbrook held the note for the first time. She didn't cry. She simply held it to her heart and whispered, "I knew you were brave." News outlets swarmed. Documentaries were proposed. People from across the country sent letters, prayers, apologies. But Marlene wasn't interested in publicity. She wanted answers. The problem was, Ellis Drew had now gone silent. The day after the shack was found, he disappeared. His car was abandoned near the desert border. Inside there was no note, no wallet, just a single Polaroid photo, too water-damaged to make out clearly, but possibly of a young girl standing near a tree with the sun behind her. For days, law enforcement across state lines searched for Ellis Drew. With his disappearance, a familiar silence returned, frustrating and eerie. It felt like the case was slipping back into the shadows. But then, a break came from an unexpected place. A box of photographs discovered in a storage unit Ellis had rented under his alias. Inside the box were hundreds of images, old Polaroids, blurry and time-worn. Most were landscapes, trees, quiet lakes. But mixed in were photos of children. Some appeared to be candid shots of camp activities, others zoomed from a distance. Then one photo stopped the room cold. It was of a girl sitting on a rock by a creek, holding a stick like a wand. Her clothes were oversized, her hair unkempt, and her face, older but unmistakable, matched an age-progressed image of Katie Holbrook. The photo was dated in the corner, August 1998. She had been alive. More disturbing was another photo, the same girl asleep in what looked like a basement corner, curled into a blanket next to a rusted lantern. That one was undated. The photos reignited public attention. FBI involvement deepened. Criminal profilers were brought in. They concluded what many feared. Katie had been kept alive for over a decade, hidden in remote shelters, moved between cabins and possibly other structures no longer standing. She might have escaped at least once, long enough to leave the tree note and try to find help, only to be found and taken back. But after 1998, everything went cold again. No new photos, no sightings, no notes. And then came a call from a forensic archivist working with a national missing persons database. She had been cataloging evidence from unsolved cases and stumbled upon something odd, an anonymous letter mailed in 2003 to a women's shelter in Montana. The letter had never been followed up because it was unsigned and vague, but now with new handwriting samples from the tree note and diary, a match was confirmed. The letter read, "I'm alive. I have nothing left, but I'm watching the trees for signs. I want to go home, but I'm too far gone. Please tell her I love her. K." It was dated just 6 months before the hollow tree note was discovered in Harrowsville. The implication was devastating. Katie had still been alive in 2003. And maybe, just maybe, she still was. Investigators and volunteers retraced every known location from the maps and photos, searching deeper into national forests, remote mining paths, long abandoned campsites. Canine units, drones, even thermal imaging were used. No sign. But they did find one more thing. In a logbook at a closed ranger station near Bitterpine Lake, an entry had been scribbled in pencil. It wasn't an official note. It simply read, "The sky is orange tonight. I saw the birds return, 3 tall pines, I'm still listening." The initials KH followed, there was no date. But the page was recorded in the fall of 2004, and so the strongest theory emerged. Not that Katie had died in 1986, but that she had survived in the margins of society, hiding in plain sight, conditioned by fear, isolation, and the trauma of captivity. Some believed she had tried to leave messages in places she once felt safe, trees, trails, ranger posts, but she never made it all the way home. And maybe she didn't want to be found. In the years following the last confirmed trace of Katie Holbrook, the story evolved from a cold case into something else, an echo that never stopped reverberating through the lives it touched. Her name became more than a mystery. It became a reminder of what silence can hold, of what the woods can keep, and of what might still exist just beyond the edge of knowing. Marlene Holbrook never stopped believing. Even after experts declared the likelihood of Katie's survival slim, even when the official case status remained missing, presumed deceased, she kept a candle lit by her window every evening. She often walked the trails near Bitterpine alone, pausing near the 3 tall pines, whispering Katie's name as if the trees themselves might answer. Camp Echo Pines closed for good in 2007. The land was eventually purchased by a conservation trust, and by 2010, a memorial trail was open to the public. At the trailhead stands a carved bench made from reclaimed wood of the old cabins, with Katie's full name and the words, "I'm still listening." Visitors from across the country now hike the loop, many not knowing the full story, only that a girl vanished once and left behind notes, drawings, and whispers through time. Others know every detail and come to pay their respects. Some leave flowers, others notes of their own, messages to missing loved ones, apologies, prayers. The case inspired a generation of awareness. Protocols for camp safety were revisited across the country. Search and rescue training improved. And perhaps most poignantly, a non-profit was founded in Katie's name, the Hollow Tree Project, which helps families of long-term missing children preserve memories and advocate for reopening stalled investigations. But not all mysteries tie themselves neatly. To this day, no body was found, no remains, no conclusive sign that Katie died. Only traces, only voices, only shadows on tree bark, initials in hidden places, words that outlasted time. There are those who believe she escaped and started over somewhere else, choosing to live anonymously, healed just enough to vanish by her own design. Others believe she never left the forest, that her final resting place is among the pines she once drew, the trails she once wandered, and the silence she tried so hard to break. Whatever the truth, her story remains one of the most haunting, unsolved disappearances in American history. Not because of gore or horror, but because of her voice, because of what she left behind: a note in a tree, a diary hidden in fear, a message scribbled in a ranger's book. These weren't cries for help. They were breadcrumbs, proof that Katie tried, that she remembered, that she loved, and that, in her own way, she fought to be heard. If you visit Harrowsville today, you might pass the old road to the camp, now gated and grown over. If you listen closely near dusk, you might even imagine hearing her voice, or perhaps it's just the wind through the tall pines, whispering, "I'm still here."